Esther Hochfeld was on her way to the factory thinking about small things. Getting there on time, finding her place, making it through a few more hours at the machine, then heading back down to the street. When she stepped onto the 9th floor of Triangle Shirtwaist, she found what she always found. Rows of machines, tables stacked with fabric, scraps everywhere, voices, needles moving in and out of cloth with the kind of rhythm that slowly filled the whole room. Esther sat down, settled her hands, and slipped back into the repeated motion of any other Saturday. Around her, the shop kept moving with the same cramped urgency it always had. There was barely any space between rows. Chairs, baskets, piles of material, narrow aisles. The heat stayed trapped inside. So did the dust and lint. None of that was new to Esther. Anything new would have stood out. But up there, in that moment, nothing seemed capable of stopping the day. Just work. Just the metallic sound of the machines. Just that deceptive feeling that everything would end the way it always did. The shift winding down. People rising to their feet, the building slowly emptying out. Tessie Weisner was there that day too. She had not come back to work. She had come because her friends had invited her. Tessie was no longer employed at the factory, but she was about to be married and they wanted to celebrate her. That made her presence on the floor feel different. Not everyday exhaustion, but something lighter, more human, more intimate. A moment of happiness tucked inside the workday. Tessie was 21, born in Austria, and had been in the United States for 6 years. Nothing suggested she had returned to that building for the last time. At Triangle, certain things had already been accepted as part of the place. The exits were not really in the workers' hands. The bosses controlled one of the doors, and it was standard practice to inspect handbags on the way out, supposedly to prevent theft. No one talked about that as if it were a threat. They talked about it the way people talk about an uncomfortable rule that has been there so long it starts to feel normal. But they were not spaces the girls truly felt belonged to them. They were part of the factory, like the machines, like the orders, like the time that did not fully belong to them while they were still working. Down on the 8th floor, something small began to slip beyond anyone's control. It was later believed that it may have started with a cigarette butt or a match that had not been fully put out, tossed into piles of scraps stored beneath a cutting table. What is certain is that the fire found the perfect place to grow. Light cloth, paper, wood, oil, dry waste gathered at the end of the workday. First, it was a flame that still looked manageable. Then someone tried to stamp it out. Then they reached for the hose and the hose failed. And by the time people understood this was no brief scare, the fire had already found too many things to cling to. On the 9th floor, the change did not arrive first as a wall of flames. It arrived as confusion. A shout, heads lifting at the same moment. A strange break in the rhythm of the room. Some kept doing what they were doing for another second or two, as if the body needed time to accept that the ordinary day had split open. Then the real break came. The smoke started to hit them, not yet as a full cloud, but as a presence that should not have been there. The sounds changed. They were no longer just machines. They were hurried footsteps, voices rising over one another, someone asking what was happening, someone else looking in the direction they did not want to look. Within moments, the entire floor stopped feeling like a workplace. Then the rush began. Not a clean rush. Not an orderly exit, a mass of people all reaching for the same thing at once. Workers ran toward the Washington Place staircase. Others turned toward the elevator. Others froze for an instant, caught between the noise, the smoke, and disbelief. When some of them reached the door, they shoved it and it did not open. Again, it did not open. Behind them, the pressure kept building. More people arriving, more voices, more hands. And the smoke was no longer asking permission. It moved through the air, made breathing harder, and started to blur what had been clear only a minute earlier. In that moment, the door stopped being a door. It became an answer that would not come. The elevator still looked like hope. People threw themselves toward it. It went up and down as long as it could, carrying more than it should, taking in whoever could still force their way inside. The girls shoved, suppressed, climbed onto tables and chairs to gain a few inches. The narrow aisles, the chairs, the baskets, everything that had already made the room cramped now became an obstacle. Every object took time away. Every second mattered. The elevator made several trips. On one of them, it came down so overloaded it almost turned into another fall. After 3 trips, according to a witness from the time, the machinery gave out. And when that happened, the sound inside the room changed again because many people understood at once that one of the few visible ways out had just disappeared. What followed was worse. The fire escape did not truly lead to safety and eventually gave way under the weight. The fire ladders did not reach the 9th floor. From above, the windows began to look like the only part of the building where air still existed. From below, people looking up at the facade saw workers leaning out of the windows, desperate for air. Some tried to get out. Others could no longer find the space or the time to react to the heat and the panic. Others stayed trapped there, with no room to go back and no way forward. Those windows became the image people would remember, but the true scale of the disaster was inside. The heat closing in, the air worsening. The entire floor turned into a trap for hundreds of people whose day had felt normal only minutes before. Then came the silence of the numbers. 146 people died. Most of them were young immigrant workers. Esther Hochfeld was among them. Tessie Weisner was too. And this matters because at that point, it is no longer reconstruction. It is record. Esther was a real victim of the fire. Tessie, the former worker who had returned at her friend's invitation to celebrate her wedding, also died there. Max Hochfeld, Esther's brother and a survivor, would remember years later the loss of his sister and the weight of having made it out alive when she did not. Triangle did not remain a blurred scene from the past. It stayed tied to specific names, specific ages, specific families. This truly happened. And only then does what came after enter the story. The public outrage was enormous. The owners, Harris and Blank, were put on trial for manslaughter, but the jury acquitted them. The prosecution could not prove that they knew the Washington Place door was locked at that exact moment. That was the loophole. Even though controlling how the workers left was common practice, and many of them were routinely funneled toward Green Street for handbag inspections at the end of the shift, the jury was told to focus on something much narrower. Whether the owners knew the Washington Place door was locked right then. And because that could not be established with certainty, they walked free. Then came 23 separate civil suits. In 1914, the settlement came out to $75 for each life lost. That settled nothing. It repaired nothing. But the fire did push something larger into motion, a real wave of reform. New York created the Factory Investigating Commission, examined working conditions on a broad scale, and from 1912 to 1914 turned a key part of its recommendations into law. The new rules tightened fire safety, ventilation, sanitation, machine guarding, elevator operation, and exits. At that point, it can be said plainly and without exaggeration, Triangle changed workplace safety, and it did not end with laws. It ended in memory. For decades, unions, firefighters, and labor organizations kept honoring the victims in commemorations outside the building. In 2023, a permanent memorial was dedicated at the site of the fire, a steel ribbon bearing the names and ages of the victims, designed to descend from the 9th floor where most of them died. That piece is not there to decorate anything. It is there to make people look up and remember that workplace safety did not come out of an office or a speech. It came out of places like that, out of doors that did not open, out of exits that did not go far enough, out of young women like Esther and Tessie who walked in believing it was just another day and left behind a warning that is still alive. Their memory reminds us not to take a single moment for granted. Let the story of Tessie and of those who died there push us to value each day. If this story moved you, subscribe for more events and forgotten voices.